The wind, a constant, abrasive presence, was the true voice of Juniper Ridge. It scoured the hardpan earth, whispered through the skeletal mesquite, and sang its lonely song through the timbers of Samuel Hart's failing ranch. Cole Braxton, a stoic silhouette against the vast New Mexico sky, listened to it all, the wind and the silence. 9 years. 9 years since the cannons fell silent, since the last tattered flag was lowered. He drifted, haunted by the specters of forgotten battles, until Samuel Hart, a man whose eyes held a similar weary understanding, offered him a place. Not a home, never a home, but a stretch of fences to mend, a few head of cattle to wrangle, and merciful anonymity. The work was honest, back-breaking, and blessedly simple. It kept the ghosts at bay, most days. He liked the rhythmic creak of the saddle, the scent of dust and sage, the quiet clatter of the branding iron. The saloon served a passable whiskey, strong enough to blur the edges of memory. This was as close to peace as Cole Braxton figured he'd ever get. Juniper Ridge was a collection of sun-baked adobe and weathered wood, a precarious outpost clinging to civility on the fringes of the territory. Miners scratched a living from exhausted veins, ranchers battled the elements, and an uneasy truce held between the townsfolk and the Mescalero Apache who claimed the stark beauty of the surrounding mesas. That calm, however, was as fragile as a sun-bleached bone. One sweltering afternoon, a roar of steam and iron shattered the quiet. A train, unlike any the tiny rail stop had ever seen, rumbled into view. It wasn't a freight hauler or a passenger coach. This was a statement. Dark-suited men, cold-eyed Pinkerton agents, disembarked, followed by a strutting, silver-tongued man who introduced himself as Vincent Rigg of the Red Iron Line. He spoke of progress, destiny, and eminent domain. Whispers turned to murmurs, then to outright fear. Samuel Hart, a man whose stubbornness was as legendary as his kindness, refused to sell his patch of dust, directly in the path of Rigg's ambition. Weeks later, the wind blew through an open barn door, carrying the scent of death. Samuel Hart was found hanging from a rafter, a tragic suicide, according to Sheriff Merton, a man whose ambition had blinded him to the obvious. But Cole knew. He saw the marks on the ground, the forced entry, the telltale glint of a discarded railroad map tucked under Samuel's boot. It was marked with a hastily scribbled Red Iron Junction across the mesa's silhouette. The quiet was gone, replaced by the faint, distant echo of drums from the hills. Cole stood in the barn, the heavy scent of hay and old wood mingling with the lingering chill of death. Sheriff Merton had come and gone, his pronouncements of natural causes and melancholy ringing hollow. The railroad map, creased and discarded, lay on a nearby feed trough, the bold scrawl of Red Iron Junction like a brand across the mesa. It cemented what Cole already knew. Samuel wasn't just murdered, he was silenced. Elena Hart, Samuel's daughter, was a storm of grief and fury. Her eyes, red-rimmed but defiant, burned with a fierce resolve. They killed him, Cole. They want this land. She clutched a worn rifle, Samuel's, its stock smooth from years of use. Cole watched her, a familiar ache starting in his chest. Fighting gets you ghosts, Elena, he rasped, his voice rough. The words tasted like ash. He'd seen enough ghosts for a lifetime. He'd left the war, left the killing, to escape them. Every instinct screamed at him to saddle Dusty and ride until Juniper Ridge was a distant memory. But the sight of Elena, young and vulnerable, yet fiercely determined, held him fast. He found Josiah, hollow, wild by the old watering hole, his half-Mescalero heritage etched in his aquiline features and the quiet wisdom in his eyes. Hollow had been a scout during the war, an uneasy ally in a bloody time. His expression was grim. The drums. They speak of the mesa, Hollow said, his voice low like wind through dry leaves. Desecration. It will mean more than just words between the settlers and my people. As Hollow spoke, Cole's mind reeled back. A dusty road, the scent of burning wood, the screams of villagers. A sudden ambush, betrayed by a commanding officer, leaving an entire Mescalero village to its fate. He'd tried to save them, but failed. The memory, sharp and bitter, wrapped around him like a shroud. He'd promised himself he'd never stand by again, but here he was, on the precipice of another potential disaster. The railroad's presence grew more oppressive each day. Riggs' men, a mix of Pinkerton thugs and local opportunists, rode through town with impunity. The townsfolk, fearful, started to buckle under the pressure. Some already spoke of taking the railroad's paltry offers, eager to escape the escalating tension. The very earth seemed to conspire against them too. A recent sandstorm had choked the passes, isolating Juniper Ridge from the outside world. There was no easy escape. The pressure from the red iron line intensified. Rigg, emboldened by Sheriff Merton's complicity and the town's growing fear, began construction near the mesa's base. His men worked day and night, their hammers echoing like a death knell across the valley. One evening, a rider from Riggs' camp delivered a formal invitation, a negotiation at the rail tunnel after midnight. Elena, ever defiant, insisted on going. Cole, despite his misgivings, knew he couldn't let her go alone. They rode Dusty, the old Mustangs hoofed soft against the dusty trail. The tunnel entrance yawned, a black in the moonlight. "This feels wrong, Elena." She gripped her rifle, her jaw set. Samuel never backed down. As they approached, a sudden volley of gunfire erupted from the shadows within the tunnel. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an ambush. Cole reacted on instinct, throwing Elena from the saddle and drawing his own aging revolver, bullets kicking up dust around them. Shots returned fire, but Elena cried out, a sharp gasp as she crumpled to the ground, a dark stain blossoming on her shoulder. They scrambled back into the darkness. Hollow, who had been scouting ahead, appeared like a wraith, his rifle spitting fire. They knew, he hissed, his face grim. The deputy, Willard, had been tasked by Merton to keep an eye on them. He met Cole's gaze, his young face pale, caught between his oath and the escalating brutality. Word of the ambush and Elena's injury spread like wildfire, fueling both fear and resentment in town. Some residents, their faces drawn with worry, packed what little they owned, ready to sell their land for whatever Rigg offered. They wanted no part of the fight. The sandstorms, relentless and fierce, continued to cut off the roads, adding to the sense of claustrophobia, trapping them in Juniper Ridge with Rigg's tightening grip. Cole tended to Elena's wound in the relative safety of Samuel's ranch house, the silence punctuated by her shallow breaths and the distant sounds of railroad construction. The air grew heavy with defeat. He looked at the few remaining possessions in Samuel's room, a life distilled into objects. His eyes fell on a leather-bound journal, tucked away in an old chest. He opened it, dusty pages brittle with age. Samuel's familiar, steady hand filled the pages with observations on weather, cattle, and, surprisingly, musings on the delicate balance of the land. Then Cole saw an entry detailing a skirmish years ago, a Mescalero child caught in the crossfire. Samuel, against all odds, had saved him. The child's name, Hollow. Samuel had protected him, just as he had protected the fragile peace between the spirits of the land and the encroaching settlers. A profound understanding settled over Cole. Samuel hadn't just died because of his land. He died for a way of life, for a balance he understood. And in the bottom of that chest, wrapped in a faded cloth, was a rusted, tarnished deputy badge. The revelation from Samuel's journal was a jolt, a cold hand reaching from the past to grip Cole's conscience. Samuel Hart wasn't just a rancher. He was a bridge, a quiet guardian of a fragile peace. His act of saving a Mescalero child, Hollow, humanized the very conflict Cole had sought to avoid. It wasn't about land deeds and railroad tracks alone. It was about sacred trust, about a balance that, once broken, would unleash a torrent of blood. The rusted deputy badge in Samuel's chest, tucked away almost reverently, seemed to hum with silent purpose. It wasn't about law by title, but by justice. He rode Dusty, the battle-scarred Mustang, towards the mesa. The sun, a fiery anvil in the sky. The heat shimmered off the red rock, making the distant figures of Riggs' men seem like distorted phantoms. At the foot of the mesa, where the scrub brush met the ancient stone, Hollow waited. He hadn't been surprised by Cole's arrival. "The elders will hear you," he said, his gaze unwavering. Cole spent hours on the sacred ground listening. The Mescalero elders, their faces etched with the wisdom of generations, spoke of the spirits that resided in the mesa, of the ancestors buried beneath its shadow. They spoke of the warnings carried on the wind, of the inevitable wrath if the ground was despoiled. Cole explained Riggs' plans, the forged documents, the murder. He spoke of Samuel, not as a settler, but as a man who understood their reverence, a man who had earned their respect. Slowly, painstakingly, a fragile understanding was forged. It was during this conversation that one of the elders spoke of Samuel's strange fascination with the back of the mesa, where few dared to tread. He spoke of a spirit path he once walked. The elder murmured, his eyes distant. Cole remembered Samuel's meticulous, if somewhat eccentric, notes in his journal about hidden springs and unusual rock formations. A glance at the terrain around Riggs' growing camp, and then at a crude map Samuel had sketched in the journal, confirmed it. Samuel had indeed mapped a hidden trail, a pass leading behind the Red Iron Line's main encampment, a way to flank Riggs' men unseen. Back at the ranch, Elena, pale but resolute, listened as Cole laid out the plan. Her shoulder was still bandaged, but her spirit was unbroken. Even Deputy Willard, looking drawn and weary, showed up. "Sheriff Merton is threatening to arrest Hollow," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. But Samuel was a good man. The choice had been made. Cole reached into Samuel's chest, pulling out the old deputy badge. It felt strangely heavy in his palm. He pinned it to his vest, the rusted metal a stark contrast to his worn coat. He wasn't law by title, but he was law by justice. Dawn broke not with a gentle glow, but with the bruised purple of coming storm clouds. Wind, a living entity, whipped dust into stinging eddies around the base of the mesa. It was the ideal cover, a chaotic cloak for the converging forces. Cole, the old deputy badge heavy on his chest, rode dusty through the pre-dawn gloom, Elena riding beside him, her rifle secured across her lap. Hollow led them, a shadow among shadows, guiding them along the hidden pass Samuel had meticulously mapped. The pass was a treacherous ascent, a series of narrow ledges and rocky outcrops. Samuel's intricate knowledge of the mesa, gained from years of quiet observation, proved invaluable. They emerged on the backside of Red Iron Line's sprawling encampment, overlooking the raw earthworks and skeletal frames of makeshift buildings. From their vantage point, they could see the Pinkerton guards fanned out, their rifles glinting in the pale light. Below, at the main approach to the mesa, Deputy Willard stood with a nervous but determined group of townsfolk. They comprised the old and the young, ranchers and miners, men and women who had finally chosen to stand for their home. Willard, his face etched with strain, held Samuel's old shotgun. He glanced at the sky, then back at the Pinkerton line, checking the courage in the eyes of those who stood with him. The storm clouds now churned directly overhead, a fitting backdrop for the impending clash. A flash of lightning ripped across the sky, followed by a low rumble of thunder. It seemed to be the signal Rigg had been waiting for. He emerged from a partially constructed shack, a sneer twisting his features, flanked by his most ruthless Pinkertons. He carried a silver-handled pistol, a glint of cruel anticipation in his eyes. "Well, well," Riggs' voice cut through the wind, surprisingly clear. "If it isn't the valiant remnants of Juniper Ridge." He gestured with his pistol towards the construction site. "This is the future, old man." Then Rigg noticed Cole, or rather, the familiar dust-colored Mustang. A flicker of recognition, then condescending amusement played across his face. Braxton, the scout who ran. He let out a harsh laugh. "You left your war for a reason, didn't you? Because you couldn't win." The words struck Cole like a physical blow, igniting a cold, quiet fury that had simmered for years. But Rig had miscalculated. This wasn't the same Cole Braxton. This ghost was ready to fight. As Rig spoke, he moved his hand slowly, almost imperceptibly, towards the silver-handled pistol. It was the first move. The first shot. The first shot, a sharp crack that splintered the morning air, came not from Cole's position, but from Rig's Pinkerton's. It was a declaration of war, aimed directly at the townsfolk gathered below. The moment the bullet whistled past Willard's ear, the carefully planned strategy erupted into a chaotic, desperate struggle. From their hidden vantage, Cole and Elena returned fire, their shots sowing confusion among Rig's ranks. Elena, despite her healing shoulder, was a pinpoint shot, disarming several Pinkertons with chilling precision. Hollow, moving with the fluidity of the land itself, picked off targets, his presence an unnerving, almost supernatural force. The element of surprise was theirs, briefly, as Rig's men struggled to understand the attack from two directions. Below, the townsfolk, galvanized by the sudden ferocity of the ambush, charged the gates, led by Willard, whose naivete had been replaced by a fierce determination. Sheriff Merton, caught between his complicity and the erupting violence, hesitated, his ambition momentarily overshadowed by terror. Rig, meanwhile, roared orders, his face contorted in a mask of rage. He fired his silver-handled pistol wildly, more to assert dominance than to aim. His gaze, however, kept returning to Cole. He sneered, dodging behind a half-built support beam. "You're just another fool chasing lost causes. You couldn't protect your own, could you? The war. I heard about that little massacre. Your commander sold you out, didn't he?" The words hit Cole like a physical blow, ripping open old wounds. He saw it all again. The dust, the smoke, the screams of horses and men, the smirking face of his commanding officer riding away, leaving Cole's scout unit to be swarmed. The frantic, failed attempt to save the Mescalero elders, their stoic faces in the face of inevitable death. He'd failed. He'd run from that failure for years. But this time, the past didn't paralyze him. It fueled him. Rig's taunts stripped away the last vestiges of the drifter, the man who sought anonymity. With a roar that was more animalistic than human, Cole charged, Samuel's rusted Colt now a natural extension of his arm. He sprinted across the uneven ground, dodging incoming fire, focusing solely on the railroad baron. Rig, seeing the primal fury in Cole's eyes, lost his composure. He fumbled for his pistol, his silver-tongued arrogance replaced by fear. He fired, but the shot went wide. Cole was on him, a whirlwind of motion. The old Colt rose, almost on its own. Rig stammered, "You can't. The words were cut short. The ancient, battle-scarred pistol, Samuel's pistol, barked once. The sound was swallowed by the storm, but the impact was undeniable. Rig staggered, a look of shocked disbelief on his face, before collapsing to the dust. With Rig gone, the Pinkertons and hired guns, their paymasters silent in the dust, lost their ferocity. Some scattered, others surrendered to the townsfolk and the few resolute Mescalero warriors who had joined Hollow. Sheriff Merton, seeing the tide turn decisively, suddenly discovered his civic duty, attempting to take charge of the surrendering men. Willard, however, stood firm, his gaze leveled at the clearly uncomfortable Merton. The town had seen who was truly on their side. The battle ended as quickly as it began, leaving behind a silence heavier than the storm clouds, now slowly beginning to break apart. The sun pierced through, casting long, dramatic shadows across the mesa. Elena, her face smudged with dirt and streaked with relief, retrieved the forged documents Rig had carried the fraudulent claim to the mesa. Her sharp legal mind, honed by Samuel's teachings, would ensure their invalidation. In the aftermath, amidst the still smoking embers of Rig's ambitions, the true work began. With Elena's evidence and the Mescalero elders as witnesses, the territorial authorities, finally free from Rig's influence, were compelled to recognize the sacred status of the mesa. A treaty, drafted with Elena's careful hand and bearing the seals of both the town leaders and the Mescalero tribe, solidified the protection of the land. It represented a new beginning, a promise of a future where respect, not conquest, defined the relationship between the settlers and the native people. The Red Iron Line was dismantled, its grand vision of a railroad junction on sacred ground reduced to a pile of twisted metal and discarded lumber. The dust settled over Juniper Ridge, literally and figuratively. The townspeople, a wary but united band, began to rebuild. The fear that had gripped them had been replaced by a quiet pride, a sense of having reclaimed their destiny. They had found their voice, and their courage, guided by a reluctant protector and a young woman's unwavering spirit. Days later, a quiet assembly gathered. Deputy Willard, his youthful naivete now tempered by experience and resolve, was formally elected as the new sheriff. He wore his badge not just with authority, but with the dignity Samuel Hart would have envisioned. Hollow, his task completed, exchanged a silent, knowing nod with Colt before turning to return to his people. He would share the tale of the Mesa's defense, of the unity forged in the face of greed, weaving it into the traditions of his tribe. Elena returned to the Hart Ranch, no longer just a daughter mourning her father, but a landowner with purpose. A portion of the ranch, she announced, would be set aside as common land, accessible to all, a symbol of the shared future they had fought for. She found Cole by the old well, grooming Dusty. He held Samuel's rusted Colt, turning it over in his hand. He then returned it to its wooden box, closing the lid with a quiet click. The badge he had worn, Samuel's badge, he placed with a silent flourish on Willard's desk in the sheriff's office. Cole rode out at dawn, the dust-colored Mustang blending into the rising sun. He left no farewells, only a letter for Elena, found later on her porch. "Some men are made for building," it read in his precise, economical hand. He was a ghost no longer, yet still a wanderer, but now the path ahead stretched clear, no longer burdened by the specters of the past. The silence that followed Riggs' fall was profound, broken only by the whimpering of a few Pinkertons and the distant wind. From their vantage on the mesa, Cole, Elena, and Hollow surveyed the scene below. The Red Iron Line's private army, leaderless and demoralized, was quickly being rounded up by the triumphant townspeople and the now undeniably resolute Deputy Willard. Sheriff Merton, red-faced and sputtering, found himself summarily relieved of his authority by the rising tide of public indignation. The mesa, once a battleground, now seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. In the days that followed, Juniper Ridge began to heal. The true scale of Riggs' deceit was unearthed and laid bare. Elena, with Samuel's meticulous records and her own sharp wit, systematically dismantled the fraudulent claims of the Red Iron Line. Official territorial representatives arrived, initially skeptical, but soon convinced by the irrefutable evidence of forgery and the compelling testimony of the Mescalero elders. The railroad company's charter was swiftly revoked, their operations ceased, and the grand vision of Red Iron Junction withered to nothing more than a pile of discarded lumber and rusted rails. The most significant event, however, unfolded at the foot of the sacred mesa, witnessed by townsfolk and Mescalero alike. A formal treaty was drawn up, recognizing the Apaches' ancient claim to the land and establishing clear boundaries for its protection. It was a groundbreaking moment, a testament to the fragile but vital understanding forged in the crucible of conflict. The sun, finally breaking through the last lingering clouds, seemed to bless the endeavor. With order restored, the town came together to elect a new sheriff. The choice was clear. Deputy Willard, who had stood strong when it mattered most, was unanimously chosen. He accepted the badge with a quiet solemnity, his gaze mature beyond his years, a testament to the difficult choices he had made. Hollow, his part in the struggle complete, spoke to Cole with a rare smile. "The tale of this place," he said, gesturing to the mesa and the town, "will be sung among my people." He turned, a silent promise in his eyes, to return to the heart of the Mescalero lands, to share the victory and the hard-won peace. Elena, now firmly established as the true inheritor of Samuel's legacy, began to rebuild the ranch. But she did more than restore. She transformed. A significant portion of the land, previously kept private, was designated as common ground, open to the community. It was a tangible symbol of the shared future, a place for all to prosper. Cole watched it all unfold, a quiet observer. His task was done. He had stood when he was needed, cleared the path, and ensured justice. But his nature remained that of a wanderer. He found Samuel's rusted Colt, the weapon that had ended the conflict, and placed it back in its box. The deputy badge he had worn, Samuel's badge, he left for Willard, a silent passing of the torch. At dawn, under a sky freshly washed by rain, he rode Dusty out of Juniper Ridge, leaving no farewells, only a single, folded letter for Elena. The morning sun, now fully risen, dappled through the remaining clouds at the foot of the mesa, casting a golden light on the triumphant, yet weary, faces of the townsfolk. The battle for Juniper Ridge was won, not just through gunfire, but through resolve and a united stand. The Pinkerton men, those still standing, were disarmed and marched under the watchful eyes of Willard and the newly emboldened townsfolk. Sheriff Merton, stripped of his star and his dignity, was last seen being escorted away, his protests fading against the growing cheers for Willard. As the chaos subsided, Elena stood amidst the wreckage of Riggs' camp, a scroll of forged documents in her hand. Her voice clear and firm, she recounted the fraudulent claims, the deception that had almost cost them their home and their future. The territorial agents, who had arrived too late to the fight, but in time for the aftermath, could only nod in grim acknowledgement. The Red Iron Line was officially dead, their papers exposed as worthless lies. Later that afternoon, a council was held, not in the dusty town hall, but at the tranquil base of the mesa, where peace had finally returned. Mescalero elders sat alongside the elected town council, symbols of a new alliance. A treaty was drafted, its words carefully chosen, affirming the sacred nature of the mesa, guaranteeing the protection of Apache lands, and establishing shared rights and mutual respect between the communities. It was a document born of conflict, but forged in hope, promising a future where traditions could coexist with progress. The subsequent days saw a flurry of activity. The Pinkerton prisoners were transferred to larger forts for trial. Sheriff Willard, now wearing his new badge with quiet authority, oversaw the dismantling of Riggs' construction. The town, unified by their shared ordeal, began to rebuild in earnest. Hollow, his mission accomplished, prepared to return to his tribe. He stood with Cole by Dusty, the Mustang grazing peacefully. Hollow asked, his eyes holding a depth of understanding. Cole merely nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of his head. He hadn't found peace as an absence of conflict, but as a purpose. Hollow smiled, a rare, genuine expression. The drums will speak of this day. He then mounted his horse and headed towards the vast horizon. Elena, too, began a new chapter. The Hart Ranch, once a symbol of defiance, transformed into a beacon of cooperation. She announced that a section of the land, prime grazing pasture, would become common land, open to all the families of Juniper Ridge. It was a fitting tribute to Samuel's memory, a testament to his belief in community. Cole watched her, then turned. His work, his specific kind of work, was done. He had cleared the way. He walked to the sheriff's office, leaving the old badge he'd worn on Willard's desk, a silent message of respect. He left no goodbyes, save for a note tucked under a stone on Elena's porch. Some men are made for building. As the sun painted the sky with hues of orange and purple, Cole Braxton rode out of Juniper Ridge, a lone silhouette against the vast western sky. He carried no grand declarations, no promises to return. He was simply a man, no longer haunted, who had chosen to stand, and then to clear the path for others. The whispers began almost immediately, carried on the wind that had once spoken only of desolation. Whispers of a dust-colored Mustang, appearing and disappearing like a phantom. A ghost in a tattered coat who rode into lives, cleared away the rot, and then vanished. In Juniper Ridge, these weren't just stories. They were memories etched in the very fabric of their reborn community. Sheriff Willard, now wearing his badge with a sober pride, found his days filled with the steady, quiet work of building a town, not just protecting it. He still kept the old, tarnished deputy badge that Cole had left for him, a constant reminder of the justice that spoke louder than any law book. He'd often tell the tale of the Mesa, of Samuel Hart, and of the man who refused to run, ensuring the lessons of that brutal summer were never forgotten. Hollow, true to his word, returned to his people. The tale of Juniper Ridge, of the unity forged between settlers and the Mescalero, spread throughout the tribes. It was a rare and vital story in a world often defined by conflict, a testament to the possibility of respect and coexistence. The Mesa, now protected by an ironclad treaty, bloomed with the spirits of the ancestors, its sacredness recognized and preserved. Elena Hart, the fiery daughter who had once clung to grief, now stood as a pillar of Juniper Ridge. The ranch thrived under her capable hand, and the common land she established became a hub for the community, a place where families gathered, where children played, and where the lines between settler and native began to blur, if only slightly. She often reread the short, poignant letter Cole had left. Some men are made for building. She understood. Cole was a force of nature, a necessary storm to cleanse the land before new seeds of peace could be sown. Life in Juniper Ridge resumed, but it was a new life, built on lessons learned and sacrifices made. The memory of Samuel Hart lived on not as a victim, but as a sage, a man who saw the deeper currents of the land. The echoes of his wisdom were woven into the very fabric of the refreshed community. And Cole Braxton? He rode on, a solitary figure against the vast, untamed landscape of the West. His ghosts were quieter now, the weight of his past lighter. He didn't seek fanfare or reward, only the next place where the balance was broken, where justice needed to ride. They say he was a ghost, a whisper, a legend carried on the wind. But in Juniper Ridge, they remembered his name. They remembered the summer a man who wouldn't run cleared the way for their future and left behind not just ashes, but the fertile ground for new growth.